Excellent. And we're live.
Pause. Silence. Let's reconvene in person again to reconnect, to tell our stories, to listen, to disarm ourselves of preconceived notions, to reframe, to reflect, to unplug. Welcome to hashtag Unplugged22. Take a victory lap. High five a friend. This is your moment, our moment. Together, we unplug to connect again and remember why we started. Let's evaluate our community and our digital impact as quality conversations rooted in context. We're about real connections that translate into real-life action. Brought to you by Jamlab Africa and the Civic Tech Innovation Network.
Hello, hello. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this session. My name is Wairimu Macharia, all the way from Nairobi, Kenya, and I'm extremely pleased to be here. Just a quick introduction. I am the director and co-founder of an outfit called Fringe Graph. We're based out of Nairobi, but we serve different countries within the region. So our main focus is data and digital literacy. So we do very bespoke trainings around data literacy, upskilling organizations and individuals working in this space who are looking to pick up data skills to further their work and their cause. And I'm very pleased to be joined by the wonderful journalist, Edith Magak, a seasoned journalist in Kenya, and also working with data, and Martin Siele. So maybe you can tell us a bit about yourselves, and we can start. We can then kick off the session. Welcome, guys.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Maureen. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you. So, quick intro. My name is Edith Magak, as you've heard. I'm a content editor at Bard News Agency, and I'm also a freelance consultant with NAM aidsmap. Thank you.
Welcome,
Yeah,
Edith.
I'm Martin Siele. I'm the editor at Business Today Kenya, contributor for Quartz, and also the founder of loud.co.ke.
Welcome, Martin. So this is
Thank
a
you.
very exciting session, and I'm very pleased to have the both of you on. So to kick it off, so just to sort of set the tone for what this fireside chat is about. So we want to focus a lot on data-driven storytelling and how it's transforming the newsroom. So we've seen a lot of disruption, especially in basically in the media space over the last decade, and thanks in part to the internet and digital media. And those working in the space have been forced to innovate, or they'll pretty much be left out. So, what would you say about data journalism landscape in Kenya? And perhaps talk a bit about what you're seeing in Africa, not just in Kenya, but Africa as a whole. Are you seeing a lot of newsrooms embracing more data-driven reporting, especially in the right now we are being disrupted a lot by digital media and news spaces whereby uh, journalists are being required to pick up new skills, especially around data. Can you tell us a bit about now the landscape? Then you can talk a bit more about how newsrooms are using data-driven reporting.
Okay. That's a really good question. I think there's definitely been significant growth in the use of data by newsrooms and media organizations in Kenya over the past few years. I have noticed more mainstream organizations adopting data in how they produce their content and sort of like creating segments and features that put data front and center. But at the same time, it's still really it's something I'd say is at its infancy in this part of Africa, because media decision makers still don't really see um, they haven't really grasped the value that comes with utilizing data and content, but they're realizing that it's increasingly important, just as because it's an important part of the larger transformation and evolution of like the consumption of media in general. Yeah.
So, how about you, Edith? Are you seeing a lot of newsrooms picking up data journalism and focusing a lot more on data-driven reporting?
Yes, yes, definitely. As journalists and as newsrooms, our core goal is always to find new and innovative ways to tell stories. And
Yeah.
data journalism, does that. Like Martin has said, it's still a new kid on the block, especially in the African media industry, but it's being picked up quite fast because data stories, they help tell richer stories. Data stories mean there's less guesswork, and the stories are more factual. It makes reporting more efficient. Data stories provide deeper insight. So yes, a lot of newsrooms are open to it theoretically, but in practice it's still very minimal. But we are somewhere. We are getting somewhere.
And if you compare like Kenya to like the rest of Africa, would you say Kenya is a bit at the forefront, or is it pretty much the same across, or does it vary across countries?
Martin, would you like to go first?
Yeah, okay. So judging from just my experience and the publications I've interacted with, I'd say Kenya generally in East Africa, the media space in Kenya is generally more developed than more other countries in East Africa in general and in Africa in general. So it has been that there has definitely been, I'd say, a bigger embrace of data here, but at the same time, it's still really, really small. And I actually think that the biggest investors in like data journalism in Kenya and Africa aren't really, homegrown publications, because we are seeing the organizations who are really willing to invest in like like comprehensive data backed type content are usually larger larger foreign media organizations which have deeper pockets and can therefore fund bigger projects. At the moment, major newsrooms in Kenya still see data journalism as a big expense that might not necessarily generate the rewards in terms of maybe advertising revenue or attracting an audience, but they're also realizing that it's just super important to have data so that you can sort of offer more value in this age when the audience is really keen on getting more from journalists than they would from their social media timelines. Yeah, so I think they realize the growing importance of data in the creation of quality content, which is a big pillar of the direction the media industry is going in. Yeah.
Certainly, certainly, Martin. And especially in the last, I'd say even 2 years, thanks in part to events such as COVID-19. So a lot more people wanted credible information around certain issues. So you find that there was a huge uptake in terms of data-driven reporting. So because people wanted credible stories, and there's now a bigger appetite for anything that dispels any sort of disinformation and misinformation. What would you say then are the challenges for journalists trying to pick up these skills and maybe trying to become data journalists? What would you say are the biggest challenges for journalists looking to move in this direction?
I
So,
think
oh, sorry. Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah yeah, I'll make it quick, but I think the biggest one for I'd say the biggest one I can think of is equipping them with the skills they need, not just to utilize data well and the tools that come with it, but also just to realize the importance of data so that they can put that perspective on all the stories that they come across. So I think the biggest challenge would be the barrier of like they really don't know where to begin in terms of the skills training. Yeah, Edith.
Please go ahead, Edith. There, you're on mute. Yeah,
Sorry about that.
no
So,
worries.
in addition to the skills which Martin has mentioned, I think there's also a problem of accessing quality data because it's not just about data. You have to access quality data, is it repeatable data, and then there's the lack of financial resources because data journalism, it costs money. To access this technologies, the technologies to scrap the data and all that, and then also the reliability of the data. And then something very worth considering, I would say, is for freelance journalists especially. If you're attached to a media house, then it's easy because a newsroom may hire a researcher, a designer, a data analyst to help interpreting the numbers into news. But for a freelance journalist, it's a huge challenge because one is expected to perform the role of a researcher, a storyteller, analyst, designer, because it's all on you. So I think we also need to support freelance journalists into integrating them into telling the data stories.
And those are very valid points because I'm trying to think in terms of like where journalists go to learn skills. And also, even when you think in terms of curriculum within the institutions that teach, media, any sort of media or journalism courses, is it something they already offer? Because I imagine there isn't a lot of offering in terms of data journalism courses in these institutions. What would you say, Martin?
Um, yeah, I think you're definitely right because okay, the media courses in Kenya in particular, I can't say they speak to the evolution in media in general. So a lot of people who join the newsroom, even just without thinking of it from a data perspective, find themselves having to learn how to interact with all these different digital tools on analytics and sort of content marketing and all these things. But data is definitely part of that, and a lot of that's why I said skills is the biggest challenge because there's other challenges like access to data. Africa, we don't document enough of our own data, so there are very important topics where you might struggle, for example, to find important data. But on training, I don't think that the education system necessarily equips young journalists to take on data journalism, and there's also that apprehension of young journalists towards numbers because they imagine this this statistical nightmare might be difficult for me to comprehend and sort of analyze. But once you sort of like once you can get them to understand how all the different ways in which they use data can be used, and in some cases they've already even been using data but they just didn't realize that data can be this powerful. So I think it's just really important to get more people aligned with sort of the opportunities that and the possibilities that data offers storytelling. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And for you, Edith, do you feel the same in terms of skill development and basically that apprehension and this is something I've had a lot before, especially from those who are not specifically working in the area of say data science, such as maybe those within media, so that there's that apprehension of, oh my goodness, it's so technical, how do we get started, or things such as like I hate statistics, so there's no way I can do something as technical as data journalism. So what would you say about that? Sorry, Edith, you're on mute.
I am so sorry, I keep forgetting. So I was saying, to your earlier question about curriculum and skill set, there are universities. I'm aware that Technical University of Kenya has now incorporated data journalism. So that's, good news because now universities are reviewing their curriculums because this is now important. So that's a positive development. And I forget what you asked me again. Oh, the attitude of journalists, towards data stories. So, like for example, myself, I mostly report on health stories and arts and culture stories. So before I was like, yo, data stories, because I was just thinking about all these numbers and statistics, and I thought, maybe finance journalists, business journalists can use data, but I'm a health reporter. Why do I need to do data stories? So it felt so out there, like it is not for me. I don't need to get, my head wrapped up with numbers and all this. So I was just like, this is not for me until I came in and until I saw how people are using data stories, even in music stories, even in arts and culture stories. Data stories fit anywhere and they are perfect for any beat, they're perfect for any segment. And we find that the stories that incorporate data actually do much, much more than just blank, plain stories. So, so anyone out there who's listening, I know maybe I should say this at the end, but I'm just going to say this now. You can use data stories in any beat, in any segment in media, and it's very accessible.
And that's so encouraging to hear. So actually, this is actually a good segue into like talking about your personal experience uh, becoming a data journalist and how the process has been. Because last year, both of you, we were very fortunate to have the both of you in our inaugural fellowship that ran last year for the Baraza and Fringe Graph. So I'd like to hear a bit more about your personal experience, especially in in your reporting journey, how your stories have changed, how you approach a story before you decide, okay, fine, this is what I want to, this is a story I want to tell, this is how I'll source my data, and this is what I'll produce at the end of it. Like walk us through that journey from once you, I guess, once you finish the fellowship and how you approach stories now as a data journalist. So we can start with Martin.
Yeah, so yeah, I did the Baraza Media Lab fellowship last year. So that was basically, I'd say, my introduction to data journalism as like a thing on its own, and yeah, I can see that it was really eye-opening for me because it just showed me all the different ways in which I can employ data to sort of tell stories better. Because personally, I'm big on impact, so when I tell stories, I really want them to have some sort of impact. So I feel like I realized that data can go a long way in helping the audience understand and like grasp the magnitude of what you're saying and to put things in perspective and actually ground them with the facts away from rhetoric. So the biggest thing about data is that it's it's because you all have our biases, but when you start from, okay, what does the data say, you ground your story in fact, so that even when you bring out other opinions and other perspectives, we know what is actually the reality on the ground. So I think I was happy to get into the fellowship because what I pitched for it was basically a passion project. I'm very passionate about like music in Kenya and Africa in general, not just music, but music, sports, and entertainment. So, and I was concerned about all the problems in the music industry in Kenya because the royalties collection system is so flawed. It still is, and artists basically don't get what they deserve. So, in more developed countries where these systems work, an artist can live off one hit for the rest of their lives because they'll get royalty checks every time the song is played or used in media or like movies and stuff. But in Kenya, that's not the case for so many reasons. So it was an investigative story that really dug into into why this is the case, and it so for the data I looked, I explored the organization, the main organization that is responsible for collecting these royalties on behalf of artists. So they collect license fees from businesses who are required to pay a license to play Kenyan music. hundreds of thousands of businesses. Media houses are also supposed to submit logs of the music they play, and this is supposed to inform the royalties. But I also found out that they weren't presenting that data, and looking at the data that was the financial statements of this collective management organization called MCSK, which is the body responsible for collecting these royalties. I realized that a lot of the funds they collect were going towards administrative expenses and like board remunerations. So basically, a few fat cats were benefiting at the expense of artists. And I actually, I realized that data isn't just a journalism thing, it's important in all aspects of business and life and stuff, because even in that situation, one of the biggest problems was that they were not using data. So, for example, the media houses were not submitting data that is supposed to inform us on who was the most played artist, so who should get the most money. And you'd find that often artists who've had the biggest hits were still not doing well financially because they weren't really able to earn from the as much as they could have from the success of their music. So covering that and following that trail and interviewing all those different people, it helped me gain different perspectives, and I was able to tell a story that was grounded in data, but and an important story at that. So moving on from that, I've been able to sort of approach all the work I do with sort of an eye for data, because, like I said, I believe it should be the foundation for the truth, should be for the foundation for any story, and we have a responsibility to the audience. So, what data helps me to do is it helps me put my biases to the side and to sort of tell the story as it is, while even when I bring in other perspectives, I make it clear that this is actually what is happening, but this is this perspective and this. So I use it a lot. So just to give like some quick examples, for Quartz, I do a weekly series that looks at different industries and exploring data and numbers from different sectors and looking at why that's not working. And also for Loud, I do creative pieces that utilize data. So like looking at the YouTube viewership numbers of different artists and where they are getting their viewership from. And for example, you realize that a lot of Tanzanian artists, for example, are propped up by Kenyan fans, for example. So just interesting things like that. But nowadays, I approach everything just with that data lens. Yeah.
I love that, Martin. Absolutely love that, because it actually makes you not just a critical producer of that story, but also um, a critical consumer. So you're able to ask the questions, you're able to explore, find the data that you actually need to produce that story. And for you, Edith, I'm interested in hearing about your experience as well and how that has changed how you approach your storytelling. Please tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so when I came in to the Fringe Graph Data Fellowship, I was as green as grass. It was also like Martin, it was my first experience with data journalism. Sorry about the background noise. It was my first experience with data journalism. I was a bit nervous when I joined the class, but I found that, data journalism actually are very accessible, because I used to think it's only this intense statistics, but I found out during the fellowship that, it can be a flowchart, it can be an interview, it can be, a map, it can be a location. It doesn't have to be, all out there. They're just simple. There's so many types of infographics, and knowing when to use them. So that was really helpful. When do I use a map? When do I use a chart? When do I use a how to? So those are really interesting things that I learned during the fellowship that I found myself currently practicing. I just had a story go out the day before yesterday, on 18th actually, a data story that I did on industrial mines and their relationship to HIV in Africa. And it's not like it's a new story, it's been reported before. But what happened with this story is a research had been done by some scientists on, when an industrial mine opens in Africa, you find that after the industrial mine opens, the population becomes twice as likely to be HIV positive than before the mines opened. So I did this story, and my editor just emailed me this morning that we've had a lot of eyeballs on this story, and it was actually picked by John Hopkins University in the US. They sent it out in their weekly newsletter, and was like, how did they even get to see it? So my editor said because it's a data story. So before people have written about industrial mines, but this story was grounded in data, and the research was there. So it not only helps us to tell credible stories, but it amplifies issues, because now this issue is spread out. A lot of people are reading this story. So I find that incorporating data into the stories, they actually do the stories more justice than just speaking out of your mouth or just writing things. And I've done a lot of data stories now, even broadcast stories, because it's not just about writing. You can incorporate data, even as a broadcast journalist, instead of showing, background in the screen, the data can pop up. And these are things that I learned during the fellowship that have been really helpful to me. So I was just really glad to be there. And I'm so glad for everything that I learned. And I see the impact and the difference it's making in the stories that I produce, and that I'm more confident as a journalist. I feel that I'm now doing more. I feel like a real journalist now that I'm using data to tell stories. So it's been awesome.
I absolutely love that, Edith. Thank you so much for sharing. Then, in terms of, because I'm really interested also in terms of like the demographics of um, the uptick. So I want to understand in terms of like the stories you produce. Are you finding a lot more of the younger demographic sort of taking to these stories that are grounded in data? So basically, these data stories, because I feel like we're living in an age whereby there's so much misinformation, disinformation, and lots of fake stories. So are you finding that there's like a bigger appetite for these types of stories, especially amongst the younger demographic, or is it like spread out evenly across the different age groups? What would you say? Like, are you seeing more of an appetite from from people when it comes to these types of stories?
Okay, I'll go first. So, surprisingly, I'm finding my data stories are finding a lot of reads in academia circles. So, people in academia, professors, academics, they're actually quoting, referencing, talking about these stories, even in their classes, in their lectures, because now these are credible stories. Now they can trust these stories. So I've had a lot of feedback from people in schools, within the circles in academia, who in the past were really looking down in quotes, about the stories that journalists produce. But now they are interested in, they're actually referencing data journalism stories in their classes with their students. And so I find that it's really interesting. I never really thought about it. It's a great question, first of all, Wairimu. So I just find that it's an interesting niche. It's interesting that people in academia are now coming back to journalists to kind of like talk about what is being produced, and that also filters down to their students who are youngsters. And so it just creates an interest. And even apart from that, a lot of people who are becoming skeptical with a lot of misinformation, they're trusting data stories more. I worked briefly for an organization that went behind a paywall, and that made stories inaccessible. And for some time we thought a lot of people aren't going to subscribe, we're behind a paywall and all that. But because we're used to and still produce data stories, we find that people actually paid, subscribed to continue reading these stories, because they're revenue generating. Data stories bring in the money. So yeah, that's also another plus why we need to do data stories. So yes, 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 thank you.
That's great. And you, Martin, in terms of like, are you seeing more uptick from the younger generation because they want to ward off? Because I feel like possibly, I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah,
Like, finding a lot more
yeah.
people who are reading your stories, or the younger generation. What's like the mix of that?
I think the thing about data is the impact is found in how we use it. Like data, you can use data to tell a story that really resonates with young people, and you can also use data to get a story that will sort of capture the hearts and minds of like older people. Like if you put out a story today on like a farming related issue, and you show how maybe farmers' earnings have been declining or their productivity. A lot of people resonate with such content who are farmers or come from farming backgrounds or homes or stuff like that. And I've seen data stories on serious topics generate serious conversations. And that's part of the little bit of the movement I'm seeing even by mainstream media, because I see more use of data to tell even mainstream broadcast on issues such as public expenditure or debt or stuff like that, and it really makes the content richer. But it also data also does really can really attract the younger people, because I see, like I realize one of the things I realize is that data isn't just for journalists. Like data skills are for everyone. So I can say for a fact that even content creators who create, for example, like documentary style videos telling different stories, you see them. I see a lot of the popular content makers um, utilizing animated graphics, data visualizations that sort of make topics easier to consume, information easier to consume. And you can also attract data by telling, there's a lot of data out there that people maybe are not aware of. So just going back to that example I mentioned on uh, the data story on the where different artists have their fans, it's because there's a lot of like um, sentiments in the Kenyan music industry on sort of like a perceived lack of support for Kenyan artists, and they feel, I can say, they almost feel bad because the same Kenyan fans really and support music from other countries, and you can't really blame them because it's a very open multicultural society. But when you look at the data, you actually find like you can actually give them like an argument to work with. Like you can actually show like the top artist in Kenya is barely getting any streams, but the like an average artist in Tanzania or Nigeria has like Nairobi as their top city consistently in terms of where they get their fans. And that's something that, for example, a young artist can use to. I've seen young artists literally cite such content in saying, "Hey, why aren't y'all like listening to us? Like what?" And that sort of triggers another conversation on like the quality, the marketing, and stuff like that. But it acts as data helps start important conversations. So it helps trigger people into talking about it because they can actually say that this is an issue. And just finally, to on what Edith said is true. And I think that slow growth is because more mainstream media houses are realizing this, but audiences today want value. And even a reason paywalls haven't succeeded for many of the for some publishers in Kenya, for example, is because um, a lot of the content they have is still accessible online on social media, and there isn't enough content with an edge. And globally, we've seen a decline in companies that sort of shifted towards focus heavily on clickbait sort of content, and that's why we're seeing even a wave of consolidation in global media. So like BuzzFeed, even if you look up its stock price right now, it's lower than it was a couple of years ago. And in response to that, just like with the media industry across the world, the diversification is into like video, into like like quality long form content, podcasts, and all that, and all these different multimedia formats employ data, and some of them are heavily focused on sort of using data and also the diversification involves the creation of more platforms that tell like really high quality stories, which are almost always data rich. I feel like a lot of stories that people consider high quality, they have data in them. So yeah, I think there's just that realization that really that data adds value, I'd say, yeah, in general to every demographic. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And
Yeah.
something also to reiterate about these types of stories is that they help to unearth things that may otherwise be hidden. And that's what I absolutely love about data stories, because you can visualize an issue in a way that, really resonates with your audience. And because it's grounded in data. And of course, we talked about credible data. Your source also matters.
Yeah.
So that is one of the important things about grounding your stories in data, basically the facts and the figures, and visualizing it in such a way that people actually understand. You basically distill the issues for your end audience. So I absolutely love that. I'm seeing we have a few minutes left, and I want us to basically like talk about your parting shot in terms of like what you feel more newsrooms should be doing in terms of like upskilling. So, do you feel like they should allow more of their journalists to be going out and learning these new skills? And what do you think newsrooms should actually do in order to move, with the times? Basically, get with the program and start reporting more using data in the newsroom. So, yes, Edith, please tell us.
So, data journalism, I was going to say it's the future, but actually it is the present going into the future. We are not going back again to the way we used to tell stories. We now have to incorporate data to be taken seriously. To place value on our content, we have to incorporate the data. So, I would encourage the newsrooms to actually set a budget for this, because you don't expect a journalist to independently go and do all this work by themselves. So first of all, have a budget for data journalism stories, and let the budget include training, and not just for a select few, but let everyone be trained in data journalism. Let there be a quota. If somebody is producing like 10 stories in a week or 5 stories in a week, let's have, like out of the stories you're going to do, let's 20% of the stories be data stories. But we don't want it to come from a place of, a chore, like it just feels like, oh, it's such a huge responsibility. But I think after the training, after the journalists are made to see the importance of why we need this, why it's important, why it gives weight to your story, then I think even more journalists will be more open to incorporating data in their stories. And things like even data journalism awards, we should have something like that. It would encourage more journalists to come on board. It would give more credibility to data journalists, just appreciating the people who are, producing data. And I really liked something that, Martin said, that data journalism is not just only for journalists. I think something that we are going to be seeing in the future is even more organizations, more governments, more businesses will be creating portals for their data as they realize, the power of people having insight into public data. So make data available, make data accessible, and our news reporting would be much more easier for us. So yeah.
Fantastic parting shot. How about you, Martin? What did you say? What is your parting shot?
I think I'd say I'd echo Edith and say that again, data is for everyone. I liked what Edith just said, because I just saw a great example of it when I had to check my internet speed for this, and the biggest speed testing website is Ookla, and how they usually release this annual report on like which places have the fastest speeds, which providers have the best speeds in each country. And that's basically they just survey after each speed test. They have like something there where you can rate like the speed of your internet based on like your expectations. And that annual report is sort of considered like a global standard in terms of like internet speeds and stuff like that. So in so doing, that's a private business, but that helps them generate probably millions of dollars in free publicity, because they're cited by all these business publications and just media organizations from around the world talking about the internet speeds in their country. So I think that's one example of just like how there's a place for data in everything, especially in business, but even in journalism and content creation, it's super important. I think newsrooms should invest in data journalism and upskilling and equipping their journalists and content producers to be able to work with it, to work comfortably with data and all the relevant tools. I think that would definitely help drive the uh, more important stories being told that put data front and center. Yeah.
Love it. Thank you so much, Martin. Absolutely. So newsrooms should definitely invest more in upskilling their journalists. Also, journalists should be more open to learning these new skills, and also agitating, like Edith said, businesses, both and the private and the public sector, to make their data more accessible so that people can actually use the data to tell their stories. So this is also a good time to plug in that Fringe Baraza are doing their next data storytelling fellowship, and we'll be opening up for application in November. So all those interested in coming to join us for about a 6-month fellowship, very in-depth, learning about how not only to tell data stories, to how to source your data, the ethics around the data you're collecting, and basically the nuances of just data storytelling and understanding what it actually means to be a data journalist. Yes, so we welcome anyone for application. So you can check our social media, Fringe Graph. We're on Twitter and on LinkedIn as well, and also Baraza Media Lab on Twitter and LinkedIn. And we welcome all applications. Thank you so much, Edith and Martin, for sharing your experiences and talking about the data journalism landscape in Kenya and Africa as a whole. So we are pretty hopeful. And like, I want to echo what Edith said, data journalism is now. So we are living in an age whereby everybody should not just the journalist learning these critical skills, but everybody, because we need to be critical consumers of the information that we're consuming and the information that we're sharing. So really understanding like the data life cycle, how to tell stories using data is a very important skill, not just for journalists, but for everybody. And with that, we'll call it a close, and maybe Edith and Martin can say their bye-byes, but from me, it's thank you so much for joining us, and see you next time.
Yeah, bye bye guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.